Welcome everyone to the Convergence, Unity and Peace Co-Creators Convergence Week. We have a whole week of amazing presentations. And right now, this is our peace hour. We close with a peace hour, which I think is so appropriate. And our guest tonight is Laurie Timmermann. And let me tell you a little bit about Laurie before I hand her the talking stick. So Laurie is a global development specialist and visionary thinker with over 28 years of experience, focusing on global issues of sustainable development, agriculture, food systems, energy, environment, climate change, women's empowerment, democratization, and community bill of rights, demilitarization, and world beyond war advocacy. In the 1990s, she was very active in the Center for Visionary Leadership, World Serve, and Network of Light Communities in DC, District of Columbia. Since 2014, she has been on a knowledge quest regarding themes of awakening and disclosure and enjoying related conferences and research. So we have a lot in common, Laurie. But tonight, she brought us a very excellent presentation last night. She is hosting all this week. So be sure to turn into Peace Hour at this time, 6 o'clock Eastern, for the rest of the week until the 18th. But tonight, Laurie is going to be giving a presentation called Bearing Witness: The Cost of War and Oppression in Human Suffering and Social Upheaval. So with that, Laurie, I'm going to ask you to take over the mic, unmute yourself, and I'm going to spotlight your video, and there you are.
Well, good evening, everyone. I have a little bit of an ambitious schedule for tonight. As I said in the description, that we're going to review the causes, the aftermath of World War I in less than 25 minutes, and bringing what the implications are, what the takeaways are for us for today. And then the second half, we will touch on the covert operations of regime change and the US support for dictators. Okay, so let me just start with screen sharing. Okay, so this format is going to be a little bit like an author's, when they come to a bookstore and they're going to, share and read a little bit part of their book. So this is drawing on an article I drafted. This is going to stem from an article I wrote on a personal journey of my personal reflections on World War I. And this started for me when I was rummaging through my belongings during a move. I opened a pouch that had contents of my jewelry box, and I discovered a victory medal for the Great War. So I'll just show that here. And so the medal bands across the frayed ribbon read, France, Defensive Sector Aisne-Marne, pivotal battles credited with stopping a German military advance on Paris. Okay. Okay, so I mused that this medal was likely from my great uncle William Heinrich Timmermann, who served briefly in the Great War. As William's own father and stepmother were first-generation homesteaders from Germany, their son was being drafted to fight against his own family's homeland. I asked myself, was this medal from my great uncle Bill? Another relative named Bill Timmermann sent me a copy of his discharge papers, which showed he enlisted in Pendleton, Oregon on May 28, 1918, and he was assigned to the L Company of the 63rd Infantry as a private. So as the Battle of Aisne-Marne had started on May 27th, and Great Uncle Bill, he could not have taken part in it. So this was a mystery of, a deepening mystery of this victory medal. So let's see. So turning to the internet, I discovered that that he was assigned to the, he was assigned to the boot camp at Angel Island in San Francisco, and he would have participated in daily drill formations, followed by singing at the Presidio Parade Ground in San Francisco. So this was like stepping into a little time capsule. Martial music by the band played an important part of the development of the fighting morale, and they were proud to have learned 11 fighting songs, including one that very graphically exclaimed all the ways that they would kill Kaiser Wilhelm. I felt that I was following in Great Uncle Bill's footsteps, and I could imagine in my mind's eye what he would have seen and what he would have experienced. What might these newly drafted recruits have been trained in? Calisthenics? Of course, but British officers had also previously taught this regiment courses in bayonet, trench mortar, sniping and scouting, machine gun, and use of grenades, while the French army officers had conducted trainings in new infantry attack formations, and oh yes, gas drill instructions continued out throughout the mobilization. Okay. On August 12th, 1918, this entire 63rd Infantry marched along San Francisco city streets, and they were greeted by cheering crowds which thronged the pavement and were wildly waving flags from windows to the train depot, where they embarked on a train trip of 6 days to Camp Meade, Maryland, one of the largest mobilization camps in the country. At the train stops, the band and men piled off to serenade any assembled well-wishers, and one soldier was reprimanded for kissing a damsel on the train platform. Okay. So arriving at Camp Meade, the Western soldiers resumed their training, which included fast bayonet work with swinging dummies, and where difficulties of going over the top of trenches with fully armed and accoutered were first learned. Okay, sorry. Back. So among all the bravado in this history of the 63rd Regiment, one statement really stood out to me, and it was, quote, that the 63rd was the peer of any regiment before it had ever plunged into the inferno overseas, unquote. Soldiers marched into fields to their deaths at appalling rates in battles of attrition. For example, in the course of 4 months of fighting at the Battle of Somme, starting in July 2016, British forces gained an advance of few miles against German lines at the cost of 600,000 Allied lives and 750,000 German lives destroyed. So 20 million people were killed, another 20 million were wounded, while 7 million soldiers were taken captive during World War I, which also served to birth what has become the modern military-industrial complex. So here we go. Okay. On October 25th, 1918, the L Company, of which my great Uncle Bill was part of, they sent an advance party of 24 officers for Liverpool, England, arriving on November 8th. The signing of the armistice came on November 11th, 1918, just 3 weeks before my great Uncle Bill's regiment was sent to sail. As one of the emergency men, great Uncle Bill was mustered out a scant 5 days later, while the more senior men were assigned to guard the important New York City Demobilization Center. So this is one of a jaunty poem that was written by one of the servicemen of the, because for the men who didn't get across, the armistice came before they were shipped overseas. So I'll just read this out loud. It says, We'll soon be back on the job again, back from doing our wonderful stunt of marking time on the Maryland front. Yes, we'll soon be back from doing our bit, showing our courage and proving our grit. And we'll only reply to the boys who did, by God, we tried, and that's more than you did. Okay, sorry. So is there nothing that could have stopped all of the mayhem and bloodshed? Well, there is, in May of 1915, a group of 1,200 women delegates who met at The Hague in the Netherlands as part of an international Congress of Women, despite the hostilities going on. Opening remarks stated the aim of the Congress was to protest against war and to suggest steps which may lead to warfare becoming an impossibility. So a main assertion of the Congress was that international disputes should be handled by pacific means, and they called for a process of continuous meditation by a conference of neutral nations to invite the suggestions for settlement from each warring nation, and then to submit reasonable proposals to all parties as a basis of peace until peace was restored. Their resolutions also included an international court, a society of nations, general disarmament, and the principle for self-determination. Suffragette Jane Addams and the other delegates met with US President Woodrow Wilson during the summer of 1915 to gain his agreement to initiate and lead mediation between the hostile nations of Europe. Though President Wilson was sympathetic, he eventually moved away from the principles of mediation and toward military preparedness. So while President Woodrow Wilson can be credited with offering to serve as a mediator between the Allies and the Germans to air their respective interests and goals in December 2016 to December 1916 to January 1916. That is a year and a half after the women came to him with the proposal of mediation. This proposal was accepted by the Austro-Hungarians. However, the Germans declined the offer because President Wilson and the US had begun to assist the British on the side of the Allies, so therefore the United States was no longer viewed as a neutral party. Okay. So as author and activist David Swanson reports in his book, War is a Lie, the picture emerges that the US was manipulated into World War I in the aid of Britain and France. With the telegraph cable between Germany and the US cut by the British, Americans only heard news of the war from the British sources, consisting of reporting atrocities of the Huns and on the gallant British victories, depicting the conflict as a battle between civilization and barbarian Germans. So the US had only 25,000 regulars in 1917. Congress did declare war in April 1917. However, during the first 6 weeks, only 73,000 volunteered. So President Wilson's war effort needed around 2 million soldiers to fight in France. Congress was obliged to enact the draft 4 months later. Many men from the Western states would eventually have to be enlisted, clothed, fed, trained, and armed. While the Napoleonic Wars had played out without US involvement, the dilemma for President Wilson's war aspirations was how to get the American public whipped up to support a catastrophic foreign war without benefit to the defense of the US mainland. As author David Swanson chronicles, President Wilson initiated a public relations campaign under the auspices of the Committee on Public Information to sell the war. A participating member in the committee was Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, notorious for inventing the field of public relations and propaganda. The committee made use of posters, news, media, full-length films, and 4-minute pro-war speeches in movie theaters, with exaggerated accounts of German atrocities in Belgium. CPI convinced Americans that only the course of fighting Germans would make the world safe for democracy. The CPI engaged in censorship, banned images of dead Americans, suppressed stories of the violence that befell the soldiers, rights of free speech were threaded, and later on, Adolf Hitler would study and draw on the tactics of the US CPI and the British propaganda. So the over 27 million soldiers were killed or wounded, and another 7 million were taken captive during World War I. Countless families were devastated with the loss of their cherished fathers, brothers, and sons. Some 50 to 100 million died from the Spanish flu epidemic that was created and spread by the war. World War I saw land destroyed with trenches, pockmarked, shelling, and poison gas. President Wilson kept US troops in Russia to fight Soviets. After World War I, the UK-Holland Committee military body concluded it is impossible to divorce the study of defense against the use of gas from the study of the use of gas as an offensive weapon. So it stated essentially that there is no way to develop defensive weapons. Preparing for war leads to launching of war, and the way to peace turns out to lie through peace preparations. Okay. So in the aftermath of World War I, activism swept the lands of the former combatant countries to put mechanisms in place to prevent and to outlaw war. In the 1920s and the 1930s, they were characterized by widespread, fervent peace movements that mobilized millions of people. Funds were poured into the cause. Hundreds and even thousands of peace schemes sprouted up in the US and Europe. The public pressured officials and gained bipartisan support for peace measures, while newspapers championed the cause of peace. According to the author Farrell, peace echoed through so many sermons, speeches, and state papers that it drove itself into the consciousness of everyone. The agenda of banning war galvanized the peace movements into mounting an outlawry campaign, which culminated in the passage of the 1928 Kellogg-Briand Pact that outlawed war and remains international law to this day. Under the Kellogg-Briand Pact, the international norm was established to not recognize claims to territories conquered in war. The pact was used to prosecute prosecute Germany for crimes of aggression in World War II. And so here is how the clauses of the Callan-Briand Pact read. The high contracting parties solemnly do declare in the names of their respective people that they condemn recourse to war for the solution of international controversies and renounce it as an instrument of national policy in their relations with one another. The high contracting parties agree that the settlement or solution of all disputes or conflicts of whatever nature or of whatever origin they may be, which may arise among them, shall never be sought except by pacific means. Okay. So the moral force and the thinking and the power of the people, the force more powerful that spearheaded the adoption of the Callan-Briand Pact, also promoted putting into place the institutional machinery for international dispute resolution and led to the formation of the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. Peace scholar and author and activist David Swanson makes the audacious case that in the same way that slavery was abolished and genocide and rape was made illegal, so should the resort to war and violence be abolished. Swanson is director of the organization World Beyond War, a global peace and nonviolence movement, which has recently published a global security system, an alternative to war, which gives a blueprint for demilitarizing security, nonviolent conflict resolution, and creating a culture of peace. Last night's Peace Hour session gave a comprehensive overview of the solutions and suggestions in this guide. One example of effective peace activism was during NATO's recent 70th anniversary meeting on April 4th in 2019 in Washington, D.C. In response, World Beyond War and over 20 peace groups mobilized No to NATO, Yes to Peace protests. Activists came to D.C. to bear witness to NATO's militarization, bombing of 6 countries, and nuclear stockpiles, while offering alternatives and non-lethal ways to collaborate. Just one of 15 events held worldwide over that 2-week period. So the hero for the that earned the World War I medal that found its way into my jewelry box, it remains a mystery, but the medal sent me on a learning journey that leads me to state: watch out, warmongers and proponents of militarization. Compared to the peace activism of the 1920s and the 1930s, you ain't seen nothing yet. Okay, so we have these really large numbers that have been mentioned here. We have tens of millions of people losing their lives, losing their cities, their homes, losing their livelihoods. Just a story of extreme devastation. So what I wanted to do for just a period of 3-4 minutes is just to sit with that, just to have us reflect on that, just to personally reach into our sense of compassion. These were our grandparents, our great-grandparents that went through this period of time. So I thought that we would, just sit in a moment of silence to reflect on all of those lives touched on what we've just been describing. So I'll just stay silent with you just for a few brief moments. Okay, so for our second half an hour, to kind of like fast forward, to kind of take a hard look at, to take a realistic look at the U.S. foreign policy, and the progression of what's happened under the guise of U.S. defense or U.S. agendas. So for this section, I wanted to bring up the troubling issues of what we know to be true in terms of U.S. support for regime change operations in other countries, and then the subsequent support for dictators. So where I thought I would start and explore with this dialogue is in something that I personally experienced very early on in my life, and it can even be said to have, set me on my path. So as a young teen, I was an exchange student to Brazil in 1963 to 1974. Well, it turns out that Brazil had come under a military dictatorship in 1964. So the environment, it was a geopolitical education for me, where the military had taken over the control, and there were no democratic functioning bodies. There were no legislatures. So one particular dramatization of this time period that I wanted to kind of bring up is this this film called 4 Days in September. So this took place in 1969. It's an actual real event, so it's a movie dramatization whereby in protest to the coup and to the military rule, opposition groups that tipped into rebel groups formed, and one of these carried out an operation that was the kidnapping of a U.S. ambassador. So just 5 years after this happened, then I came to Brazil as an exchange student. And it's a very well done film, showing all the nuances of the different sides and the different factions or different. But this was not unique to Brazil. This was actually a trend. That happened throughout the southern cone of Latin America. In Chile, you also had the overthrow of a duly elected government of Allende by the Chilean army. That was extremely brutal. We'll get to that. But Brazil, among the southern cone countries, was the least repressive. That said, they still had a police state. They still had dark sites And personally, I have a friend, Angela Harkavy, whose brother was picked up, taken to a dark site and never seen again. So as we go along here, instead of just listening to the information, I just want us to listen with our heart. These are episodes of our planetary human family, and we need to bring our compassion, because how these violent events, affected these societies, they're playing out, and they're, in modern times. So this is what I just mentioned. Let's see. The most brutal repression took place during that period of time in Chile. The regime of Pinochet did a violent coup takeover, bombed the building of the presidency, killed the President Allende. His whole entire cabinet was taken to what could only be called a concentration camp, with conditions so dire that you can tell that the regime did not want these cabinet members to live. And there were various forms of disappearing people. And I don't want to upset anyone, but if it happened, we can be able to state it, which was that that people would be injected with a substance in order to cause their death, and then the body was wrapped in a very specific way and weighted with weights, or I think it was even a railroad tile, and then dropped in the ocean from a helicopter. So these events, these seared the people, and you can tell by the documentaries that that they are still very much traumatized by this memory. Okay, my little difficulty here. My slides are, I'm not getting it to advance. Okay, here we go. Okay, so one of the sources I wanted to bring up in this conversation, two of the sources, and investigative author is Stephen Kinzer, and his two books called Overthrow, and his one that specifically focuses on Guatemala called Bitter Fruit. So in the book of Overthrow, what Stephen Kinzer, what he documents is, what he documents is a series of 16 regime changes that is directly perpetrated by the United States. And the first one of these was in Hawaii. How did the 50th nation of Hawaii become a state? So he just really depicts how a group of 30 men plotted to overthrow the native Hawaiian queen. there was a battleship off the shore. They marched and threatened the people, and the queen said she was forced to abdicate, and she was doing so to not have bloodshed among her people. So that's how we have Hawaii. So let me just read here a little bit about this. In Overthrow, Stephen Kinzer dramatically recounts how America's long regime change century began in Hawaii and gained momentum during the Spanish-American War, when Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines fell to American military power. Soon after, the United States started flexing its muscles in Central America, taking coups that brought down presidents in Nicaragua and Honduras. So this, this extended, we can call the Vietnamese War, the murder of a South Vietnamese president, the fall of democratic governments in Iran, Venezuela, and Chile, and the recent invasions, as well as operations in Grenada, Panama, and Afghanistan and Iraq. So the story of bitter fruit and the story of Guatemala, the Guatemalan coup, is particularly troubling, as the overthrow of a popular president wanting to do good by his people, that took place in 1954 and led to 40 years of genocide against the Guatemalan Mayan people. Okay, in this slide, I'm just presenting a list by year of what the different regime change operations were in which countries and what years. So I'll just leave that up on the screen for a few moments now so people can kind of connect and grasp with the, insidious, the insidious covert US policies. Okay, so what that points to is like what are the institutions within the U.S. that are implementing these kinds of actions and operations with this focus? Primary one we can start with is what was called the School of the Americas, and this is a documentary that you're seeing called the School of the Assassins. It's the School of the Americas is in Fort Benning, Georgia, and they specifically targeted populists, unions, progressives, even Bishop Romero, nuns, that there's a direct link with the graduates from the School of Americas and a series of human rights abuses throughout Latin America. So not wanting to leave on a, leave this talk or this presentation on, this very heavy topic and this very heavy note of really, really connecting with, really taking responsibility for the U.S. hand in causing the suffering and oppression of other people. I wanted to bring to a focus here the powerful series, the PBS series called A Force More Powerful. And so this is the counterpoint. These people who in different settings found themselves under tyranny, under oppression. It was like, how did the human spirit, how did their collective action, how did their creativity cope with being in those situations and then prevail? So what is highlighted in the film starts with Gandhi, not for his work in India, but prior to that, where he kind of, had his trial by fire in South Africa, being an activist for the rights of Indian people in South Africa. It covers the Danish people and their resistance to the Nazis during World War II, the Polish resistance to communism with the labor union Solidarnosc. So with that, I thought we could kind of open up and unmute and kind of have a little conversation and dialogue on what got stirred up for people and what kind of renewed commitment might come from saying no more, saying, not again. We're changing the story. So with that, I will go to Noel to help moderate some dialogue.
I'll watch the
Okay, do you
Facebooks
want
for the
to
dialogue.
stop your share screen?
And I'll watch the Facebooks for the dialogue.
Okay. There we go. Why don't we go into gallery view and, okay.
Where am I?
Alrighty. Would anyone like to unmute themselves, have any comments after this very powerful presentation? Laurie, you bring us I've taken 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes, and I'll admit that I did have to go in and out a couple times, with other duties. But this is, so the field is open if anyone would like to unmute or turn on their video and share.
Yeah.
Hello, Jeffrey.
Hey, how you doing? That was terrific. That was really something. I was particularly taken aback by the formation of the military-industrial complex. That was, following World War I, and that kind of shocked me, because it's like because that's like the aftermath, it is not just the war, it's not only the war itself, it is the prospects that are formed in the aftermath and the manner in which they are formed that also strikes me.
Yeah. Laurie, do you want to comment anything further on that about the formation of the military-industrial complex?
Well, again, it's the numbers. We went from whatever small military that we had to this mobilization of 2 million people under arms. And with that, this huge treasure that went into creating these pop-up bases all over the country. So yes, you can really say that that was the foundation.
And wasn't it President Eisenhower, I guess that warned us about the military-industrial complex? His exit speech, which I think is very powerful. Have you shared that before, Laurie?
Well, by the time that Eisenhower, he had gone through World War II as a general, but some of the military and the special unacknowledged access programs were escaping his control, and he knew that. So he was giving a warning that this this could threaten, our democracy as we know it.
Yeah, so you're saying he was really a little late.
Yeah, Truman, under Truman and Eisenhower, some elements, and I'm just going to give, now this is called editorial content. The CIA wrote, the CIA went rogue as soon as it was formed. I have a book called, I can show it here. Okay, can you see it? The Devil's Chessboard, Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the American government. Allen Dulles. Yeah, so this man, he was, he oversaw these regime change operations that I'm talking about. That his personality, he was catering to, he was a lawyer at this Brown Harriman law firm. He had his own agenda. He was not catering to the American people. He was catering to the wealthy, to the corporate. So the CIA put together both an intelligence agency with operations, and that is a dangerous combination. And so it's been an agency that has had its own agenda and used its secrecy for this agenda. And there's a number of things that are cracking that veiled secrecy with the CIA. One of them was the Senate report on torture against Middle Easterners that was uncalled for and had no vital gain of intelligence. And then you had the Vault was released. So WikiLeaks published the Vault, and that showed how they try to design assassinations to make it look like a car accident, or or develop other ways to do that. So when I think of Eisenhower and that talk, it was like there were agencies that were escaping the control of chain of command.
Well, we had a comment by Sheila Blake, Houston. She said, "What a gift to hear your research." And Laurie, again, you just have a knockout oh, I shouldn't use that word. Just a beautiful, informative presentation. She says, 20 million dead in World War I, and still we keep going to war. And
well, so there's this bright light that I put in my talk, this bright light amidst that, it's like, that is insanity that's happening. 1.35 million killed in one battle. So this is the definition of insanity. But the light that I put into my talk was the May 1915 International Women's Congress. And it was the suffragettes, and they had their meeting anyway, and they focused, like I said in my talk, on dispute resolution, on bringing these parties to the table. And then afterwards, they fanned out to the combatant countries and made these proposals. And so a delegation met directly with Woodrow Wilson. And so here is where I go into editorial opinion again, because in the summer of 2015, they approached Wilson with the idea to do mediation. And Wilson didn't act on that until December of 2017.
well,
So just imagine being in the presidency.
1917.
1917. So just imagine being in the White House, having these reports, having the death toll mount, having in your hands the solution that you, at that time the US was a neutral party, could have done, could have acted on. And the British were very good at manipulation of American public opinion against the Germans. So there was no level playing field. And so by the time that Woodrow Wilson said, oh, let's have a mediation, he had been already roped into taking actions on the side of So basically what this research for me has done has really taken Woodrow Wilson off of a pedestal.
Mm.
Wow. Wow. Well, Laurie, this is Bob. I don't know if you had a chance to see the email I sent you a few hours ago. I listened to Democracy Now!'s Friday broadcast on the way to Best Buy this morning to get more equipment. And just talking about the cost of suffering and whatnot, an excellent feature on Democracy Now! On Friday about an author of a book talking about refugees and the cost of war as it relates to refugees. And it specifically talked about the United States, that there are kids entering college now, 19 years old, that have never known us not to be in a war in their entire lifetime. In fact, we're in, depending on how you count, 22, 24 wars right now. And that in the years since then, in those 19 years, there have been 37 million refugees created by wars that America started or is heavily engaged in or in proxy. To give perspective, 37 million is the population of the country of Canada or the entire state of California. And as we look at people who are climate fire, we're not going to call them wildfires anymore because they're climate fires, refugees, and refugees from hurricanes and other things, being homeless, imagine what that is, 37 million caused by our war machine and our thirst for war. In this
These numbers, they're numbing. I saw a very gripping film that was very well done, that went right into every single refugee situation, showed it on the ground. One of the authors that I just referred to right now said there was a time in American history where our foreign policy tried to reflect the benefit for the whole globe. But in the recent times, in certain administrations, I won't mention any, like Reagan or Bush or the two Bushes, took this very narrow, self-seeking, self-interested, U.S. first, U.S. is exceptional. David Swanson even has a book against that exceptionalism. So we really have to take back our foreign policy, and just because you had a master's degree and you went to an Ivy League school, it's like the people have to take back the people's foreign policy, people-centered foreign policy of, and a main place for that to start is to not give Trump $80 billion to add to the Department of Defense budget, which just happened within the last 2 years.
Right.
Absolutely. There's also, let me see, John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Are you familiar with his work?
I am quite a bit. I read the book, and I got to meet him in a cafe in Los Angeles by accident. Anyway, so the two of us, we both talk about the World Bank, and I have written my alternative view, having worked at the World Bank. Basically, what he does refer to is that we have a corporatocracy. Corporations have captured our elected officials, have captured our regulatory agencies, have captured our courts.
Right.
And this corporatocracy is geoengineering, social engineering the rest of society for their needs to have docile workforces. So there's a tiptoe to totalitarianism agenda here, but relating back to John Perkins, that was corruption. He admitted to corruption. He falsified.
Well, it was corruption on part of our government, wasn't it?
Well, no, this is a World Bank project.
Oh, okay.
I just wrote comments where the World Bank is not when I was there, I saw a lot of people being what I call bureaucratic entrepreneurs, shifting the needle. The bank is like this. We want it to be like this. I have lots of examples of that. I saw a lot of good projects. But in this infrastructure, you know, fossil fuels, extractive industries, water, having some type of ethic of privatization, then you have to take the bank to task. There is oversight with Congress. There was a senator over that oversight committee, and he did get the bank to adopt these anti-corruption measures and to create a vice presidency of integrity. So these institutions are not just like hidebound and without people in them that respond. And but we have to, you know, we have to do a type of an assessment of how much percentage of that World Bank portfolio is being misused.
Right. Well, that's a good question. I think we're at the top of the hour now, but I think one of the books you did refer to is David Swanson's book, American Exceptionalism. Isn't that his book, or is that which?
Yes, he does have a book on exceptionalism, on America's exceptionalism.
And that's what that's Kool-Aid a lot of us have drunk, I would say. So Laurie, do you want to close this hour out? We've really appreciated having you here. Looking forward to tell us more about what all the wisdom you're bringing to us, because you're bringing the nuts and bolts of peace, the history of it, and how we can change the institution, how we can understand what the institutions really are, so that we can be brought to the consciousness to be able to do something about it. So Karen, you'd like to say something? Go ahead.
I would like to quickly, thank you so much, Laurie. I just would like to share one thing. I was just watching this with my mom, who will be 90 in January. And, you know, this is their whole life. And it's challenging for someone like my mom or others in this generation to even imagine a world without war, even though that's what they would want in their heart. There's this mechanism within them that I realize makes it even difficult to hold that vision. And I just was really so beautiful, that moment of silence. I just thank you so much for doing that, because we got to sit and do that together and honor her family members and my dad's that were lost in the war. So thank you for this.
Okay, so the last statement I will leave people with is this: preparing for war leads to launching war. The way to peace turns out to lie through peace preparations.
Here's to more peace preparation. Yes.
May peace prevail on earth.
May peace prevail on earth. Well, we got to prepare for it.